The road curved gently through the Virginia hills, sunlight sliding across the hood of Leah Carter's old Subaru. She hadn't been back in almost 15 years. The air smelled the same, though sweet with pine and dust, carrying the faintest hint of apples. Even though it was still early spring in the passenger seat, her daughter Emily sat cross-legged, earbuds in, head against the window. Her hair caught the light same chestnut color as Leah's, but always falling into her eyes like she didn't care. "Are we almost there?" Emily asked without looking up. 20 minutes, Leah said, glancing at the dashboard clock. "Maybe less if the roads haven't washed out again." Emily made a non-committal sound, the kind teenagers perfected. Leah smiled to herself, but it faded quickly. The closer they got, the heavier the quiet felt. She hadn't planned to come back. Not really. But when the lawyer called about her grandmother's estate, said the house was hers now, she hadn't found a reason strong enough to say no. Besides, she could sell it, pay off debts, and maybe, finally, breathe. That was the plan, at least. It had been when she packed up their apartment in Richmond 3 days ago. The town sign appeared at the next bend. "Welcome to Carter's Hollow Pop, 1284. It looked smaller than she remembered. Maybe it always had been. The grocery store was still there, same faded awning. The church steeple leaned slightly, like it was tired of holding itself upright. And then the hill appeared, the one that led up to the orchard. Her grandmother's land stretched across the top, rows of trees that had once looked endless to her as a child. The blossoms would be out soon. She wondered if anyone had kept them alive since the funeral. She slowed the car, tires crunching on gravel as they turned up the old drive. The house came into view a moment later, half hidden behind wild grass. White paint peeled from the porch railings. One shutter hung crooked, but it was still there, the wrap-around porch, the blue door, the wind chime that had somehow survived every winter storm. Leah parked and cut the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. Emily pulled out her earbuds. "This is it. This is it," Leah said softly. Her daughter looked unimpressed. "It's old," Leah laughed under her breath. "So am I." Emily cracked a small smile. "You're not that old. Flattery will get you dinner." They unloaded what little they had, a few suitcases, some groceries, the box of Leah's grandmother's letters the lawyer had sent ahead. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust, like a place that had been waiting too long. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, turning the dust motes to gold. Leah stood in the doorway for a long moment, remembering summers spent on that floor barefoot, sticky with juice from apples eaten straight off the tree. Her grandmother, humming old country songs while canning jars lined the counter. It felt like standing inside a memory that hadn't realized time had passed. Emily wandered through the living room, poking at furniture with the caution of someone walking through a museum. "There's no Wi-Fi, is there?" she said. Leah smirked. "There's probably not even plumbing that works." "Great," Emily said dryly. Leah dropped her keys on the counter. "We'll figure it out." They always did. She found the first letter that night, tucked into a drawer of the old oak desk by the window. It was addressed to her grandmother, Margaret Lane Carterand, postmarked 1968. The ink had faded, the paper gone soft at the edges. "My dearest M, the orchard looks different without you. The trees seem restless, like they're waiting for your hands. The war's almost over, they say, but I've learned not to believe promises made by men far from the dirt. If you ever come home, I'll be waiting by the north fence, where the first tree bloomed. B. Leah stared at the signature, heart beating fast. B. She had no idea who that was. Her grandfather's name had been Thomas. She turned the envelope over. Reading the return address, nothing but a military post office number. For a moment, she just sat there, the house silent around her. The old clock ticking steadily like it had when she was a child. Outside, the wind rustled through the orchard, somewhere in the darkness. A branch creaked. She folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Morning came with fog and birdsong. Leah woke early, padded into the kitchen, and found a man standing by the back door. Her heart jumped. Jesus, he raised his hands quickly. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you. He was tall, with weathered hands and a calm, steady look. Grey threaded his beard. He wore a flannel jacket and boots caked with mud. I'm Ben Harper, he said. Used to take care of the place for your grandmother. Leah exhaled, hand on her chest. You could have knocked. I did, he said, a hint of a smile in his eyes. Twice. She glanced at the muddy prints by the door. Guess I was asleep. Looks that way. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he nodded toward the orchard. Trees are still alive. Need pruning, but they'll make it. She crossed her arms. You've been keeping them up. Off and on. Thought somebody should. There was something steady about his voice, the kind that made you want to listen. Why? She asked. He shrugged. Habit, I guess. Or loyalty, she studied him. You knew her well. He looked out the window, where the morning light caught the first blossoms. Well enough to know she never really left this place. Emily shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. Who's he? Ben smiled gently. Just the gardener. Emily blinked at him. We have a gardener. Leah sighed. Apparently, he chuckled, then tipped his hat. Welcome home. As he stepped outside, the sunlight spilled across the porch, catching on the orchard beyond rows of trees, waking slowly, each one holding the promise of something that had survived without being seen. Leah watched him go, the letter still folded in her pocket, and thought not for the first time that some roots ran deeper than you could ever dig out. By the third day, the orchard had started to talk to her, not in words, but in the slow way the trees creaked when wind slid through their branches. Leah had forgotten that sound, a kind of music only old wood makes, a low sigh, as if remembering all the storms it had survived. She stood at the edge of the rows that morning, boots damp from dew. The air carried the sweetness of earth and the faint tints of apple bark. She could see Ben already halfway down the field, pruning shears glinting in the sun. He moved methodically, almost reverently, cutting back dead branches, stepping aside to study the shape of each tree before deciding what to keep. It was strange, watching someone treat trees the way some people treated prayer. Morning, she called. He looked up, squinting against the light. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. The house sounds different at night. He nodded. Takes a while to remember which noises mean trouble and which mean it's just breathing. She laughed softly. You talk about it like it's alive. He clipped another branch. It is. You just forgot how to hear it. Emily appeared an hour later, holding a half-empty cereal bowl and her phone-like armor. I still can't get a signal, she complained. Try standing on the porch railing, Leah said absently. Brushing dirt from her jeans, Emily frowned. You're joking, right? Leah smiled. Mostly, Ben wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. We used to live without all that once. Emily shot him a look. We also used to die at 30. He grinned. Fair point. For the first time, she laughed, the sound sharp but not unkind. Leah watched the two of them, something stirring in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. Normalcy, maybe, or the start of it. Later, when Emily went inside to finish her homework, Ben walked over, carrying a bundle of cut branches. You ever pruned before? He asked. I can barely keep houseplants alive. Good, means you'll listen. He handed her the shears, heavy and cold in her palm. Rule 1, he said, pointing to a low limb. You cut what's dead, what's diseased, and what's crowding the rest. Leah studied the branch. How do you tell? You don't at first. You learn by mistake. She hesitated, then snipped. Sap glistened where the wood split. Ben nodded. Not bad. They worked in silence for a while. Birds flitted overhead. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked and an engine turned over. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. You stayed after she died. Yeah, he said. Couldn't quite leave. Why not? He looked toward the hills. Your grandmother gave me a place when I didn't have one. Figured I owed the place something back. Leah nodded slowly. She was like that. She talked about you, he said after a pause. Said you had her stubborn streak. Leah smiled faintly. That's one way to put it. That afternoon, Leah went through the attic, looking for more of her grandmother's letters. Dust clung to her sleeves. Sunlight spilled through cracks in the roof. She found boxes of canning jars, old quilts, and finally, a wooden chest she didn't recognize. Inside were notebooks, small, leather-bound, tied with a ribbon that had faded to the color of rust. The first page bore her grandmother's handwriting. The year is 1967. The apples came early. I told him not to plant too close to the fence, but he said beauty doesn't need permission. Leah traced the words with her finger. There was no name, but she didn't need one. It was B. She sat back on her heels, heart thudding. That evening, Ben came by the porch, carrying a jar of something amber. Apple honey, he said. Your grandmother used to make it. Leah took it carefully. You kept her recipes. He shrugged. Somebody had to. They sat for a while, watching the last light fade through the trees. Emily's laughter drifted from the kitchen as she burned toast for the third time. Leah turned the jar in her hands. Did you know a man named B? Someone who wrote to her. Ben's expression changed just slightly, a tightening around the eyes. Maybe there were letters. A few. He looked out across the orchard. Then you already know more than I ever did. Later, after he left, Leah sat alone on the porch steps, jar of honey beside her. The night was quiet except for crickets and the hum of wind in the branches. She thought about the letter, about the man who'd written from some far-off place, promising to wait by the north fence. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd go see it, for the first time in years. She wasn't thinking about leaving. She was thinking about where to begin. The fog came early that morning, curling low over the orchard like a ghost that didn't want to leave. Leah zipped her jacket and stepped onto the porch, her boots scraping against the old wood. The air was damp, cold enough to taste. The trees looked like they were floating in it, half hidden, half awake. She had the letter in her pocket again, the one signed B. Edges soft from being unfolded too many times. Down the hill, she could already hear Ben, the rhythmic snip of shears, the scrape of boots on wet soil, always working before the sun had fully risen. She walked toward him, the grass heavy with dew. "You ever sleep in?" He smiled without looking up. "Tried it once. Didn't suit me." Leah glanced around. "Which one's the north fence?" He straightened, resting his shears on a post. "Why?" "That's where he said he'd wait," she said quietly. Ben's brow furrowed. "Who? The man from the letters? B?" He looked away, jaw tightening. "That fence hasn't been much use in years." "Still," she said, "I want to see it." He hesitated, then nodded. "Come on." The fence was smaller than she'd imagined, half buried in grass and lichen. The posts leaned like old men tired of standing. Beyond it, the land sloped gently toward a stream, the water glinting in morning light. Leah crouched near one of the posts. A small metal tag hung there, weathered but still legible. #1. The first tree. She brushed her fingers over the bark. He said, "Where the first tree bloomed." Ben's eyes softened. That one was hers. She planted it the week she moved here. Said she wanted something that would outlive her mistakes. Leah looked up. "You sound like you were there." "I was a kid," he said. "My father worked this land before me. Your grandmother used to give me apples for helping haul baskets." He paused, eyes distant. "She wasn't easy to know. Kind, but..." Held her pain close. Leah nodded slowly. "I think it runs in the family." They walked the fence line together, quiet except for the buzz of bees starting their day at the far end. Something caught Leah's aja, small wooden box wedged between two roots, nearly hidden under moss. She knelt, tugged it free. The wood was damp, but the clasp still held. "Finders keepers," Ben said lightly. She opened it. Inside lay a folded piece of paper and a tarnished locket. The paper was fragile. Ink bled at the edges. If you're reading this, it means the trees have outlasted us. Maybe that's how it should be. I couldn't stay. The war took the part of me that knew how. But know this, you were the one thing I didn't regret." B. Leah's throat tightened. He never came back. Ben crouched beside her, voice low. "A lot of them didn't." She turned the locket over. Inside was a small photograph of a man in uniform, his face half-shadowed, smiling slightly as if he knew someone would keep looking for him long after he was gone. They walked back to the house without speaking much. The sky was clearing now, sunlight breaking through like gold on glass. On the porch, Leah placed the box beside the jar of apple honey. It felt right, like the two belonged together. Ben lingered, hands in his pockets. "You could have left all this to rot," he said. "Most people would have." Leah looked at him. "I thought about it. But you didn't." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I just wanted to see if anything still remembered her." He studied her for a long moment. "Places remember. We just stop listening." Something passed between them, quiet, fragile. The kind of understanding that doesn't need words. That afternoon, Leah found Emily by the barn, taking pictures with her phone. "What are you doing?" she asked, or Emily shrugged. "Just the trees. They look old." "They are." Emily lowered the phone. "Did Grandma really plant them all?" "Most of them, yeah." "Why'd she stop?" Leah looked out over the rows, wind rippling through the leaves. Maybe she didn't. That night, The house creaked with the sound of settling wood. Leah sat by the window, the locket open in her hand. Outside, moonlight slid across the orchard, turning the blossoms silver. Ben's words echoed in her mind. Places remember. She wondered what the house remembered. About her grandmother. About all the waiting that lived inside these walls. Somewhere out there, beyond the fence, a night bird called a low, aching sound, like a name stretched too long in the dark. Leah closed her eyes. The orchard, she thought, was still talking. And this time, she was finally listening. The next few days passed quietly, almost too quietly. The orchard settled into its rhythm. Sun in the morning, wind in the afternoon, the faint scent of blossom hanging over everything. Leah kept the locket in her pocket. She would touch it sometimes without realizing, her fingers tracing the worn edge like a worry-stone dot at night. When Emily was asleep, she sat by the kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through military archives, old obituaries, photographs from 1968, dozens of faces, dozens of men with the letter B in their names. None of them looked like the one in the picture. On the fourth morning, she drove into town. The main street looked almost the same. A hardware store, a diner, the post office leaning slightly to one side. Inside the diner, the bell above the door jingled. The air smelled of coffee and fried bacon. Leah Carter. She turned. Mrs. Patterson, who had run the diner when she was a girl, stood behind the counter. Her hair was white now, but her voice was exactly the same. "I thought that was you," Mrs. Patterson said. "Haven't seen you since your mama's funeral." Leah smiled awkwardly. "Guess time got away from me." "It does that," the woman said, pouring her coffee. "You staying at the orchard?" "For a while." "Good. That place needs someone who remembers how it used to breathe." Leah hesitated, then slid the locket across the counter. "Do you know him?" Mrs. Patterson leaned closer, squinting. Her breath caught. "Lord, that's Benjamin Hale." Leah blinked. "Who?" "He worked the orchard before your grandmother married. Left for Vietnam in '67, never came back. Everyone thought he was dead." Leah's pulse quickened. "You said Benjamin Hale?" Mrs. Patterson nodded. "Sweet man, quiet. Your grandmother used to walk to town with him on Sundays. Caused plenty of talk. She never mentioned him." The woman smiled sadly. She wouldn't. Maggie had a way of locking up her heart and throwing away the key. Leah left the diner with the name echoing in her mind. Benjamin Hale, the initials matched, BH driving back up the hill. The world seemed sharper, the sky too blue, the air too full. The kind of clarity that comes after a long storm. Ben was in the orchard again when she arrived. Always working, always in motion. She called out, "You ever heard of a man named Benjamin Hale?" He froze, shears halfway raised. "Why? My grandmother knew him. I found his photo." Ben set the shears down slowly. "Yeah," he said after a long moment. "I knew him." She waited. He sighed, rubbed a hand over his beard. "He was my father." Leah stared at him. "Your father?" He nodded. "He left when I was 10. Went to war. Never came back. At least, that's what I was told." Her mind spun. "Mrs. Patterson said he worked the orchard with my grandmother." "Yeah," he said softly. "That part I knew. What I didn't know was how close they were." They stood there, wind moving between them like something alive. "I found letters," Leah said. "From him to her." Ben's eyes darkened. I'd like to see them. She hesitated. They're personal. He nodded slowly. So's this place. Doesn't stop it from being real. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table, the letters spread between them. The old paper smelled faintly of applewood and smoke. Ben read in silence for a long time. Then he leaned back, exhaling hard. She never told anyone, he said. Leah shook her head. Not even me. He looked at her, eyes tired but gentle. You think he was? She shook her head quickly. No, my grandfather was Thomas Carter. I've seen the marriage certificate. It's just strange. Yeah, he said. Strange is one word for it. For a long while, neither spoke. Outside, the orchard whispered branches tapping against the window like fingertips. Leah finally said, he wrote that he waited by the north fence. Maybe he thought she'd come back. Ben's voice was quiet. She probably did. She just came too late. When he left that night, Leah stood by the window, watching his taillights disappear down the road. The locket lay open on the table, reflecting the lamplight. She touched the glass over the photograph. 2 generations, 2 secrets. One place that kept both. Maybe that was what the orchard was for, not to remember the harvest, but the waiting, later, as she locked the door. She caught her reflection in the glass. For a second, it wasn't her face she saw, it was her grandmother's. The same jawline, the same stubborn tilt of the chin, and behind it, the same question in her eyes. How long do we keep running from the places that know us best? Spring inched forward slowly that year, as if the earth itself were testing whether it was safe to bloom again. Leah spent most mornings in the orchard, the smell of damp bark and cut grass filling her lungs. She'd started pruning without waiting for Ben now, learning by habit more than knowledge. Each cut felt like part of a conversation she hadn't finished yet. Emily had stopped complaining about the lack of Wi-Fi. She'd started drawing instead, little sketches of trees, apples, the house, even Ben with his flannel shirt and quiet half-smile. When Leah caught her one afternoon, Emily just shrugged. He looks like someone who knows secrets, she said. Leah smiled. He does. Ben came up from the lower field around noon, wiping his hands on a rag. You've got a decent touch, he said, nodding at the rose she'd trimmed. Decent? She asked, pretending offense. He grinned. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. She leaned against the fence post, the same one with the little metal tag marked number 1. You ever think about selling this place? Starting over somewhere else? Ben's eyes went distant. I did, once. But every time I tried to leave, something pulled me back. Like what? He looked out, across the orchard. The ground knows your name after a while. It doesn't let go easy. She studied him for a moment. You ever think maybe we both came back here for the same reason? Maybe, he said. Or maybe the reason found us. That evening, while Emily worked on her drawings, Leah spread out the old notebooks again. One of them had slipped to the floor earlier, landing open to a page she hadn't read. The entry was dated May 1970. He came back from the war, but he was not the same. He carried silence like a wound. We said too little, too late. Tom knows, he always knew, but he stayed, and I am grateful. If love can exist in pieces, then maybe that is what we had. Leah stared at the page until the words blurred. Then she read it again. Tom knew. Her grandfather had known about Benjamin Hale and stayed anyway. She closed the notebook slowly, feeling something settle in her chest. Not anger, not even sadness, just the weight of understanding. She found Ben outside by the shed, fixing a loose plank. "Your father came back," she said quietly. He looked up, startled. "What?" She handed him the notebook. She wrote about it. He read the page, his jaw tightening. "He never came home to us. Maybe he couldn't face both lives," she said. "Maybe he thought he'd already ruined one." He handed the notebook back, eyes heavy. He did, and the other one too. They stood in silence. The sun was sinking low behind the hills, bleeding gold through the trees. "I used to hate him," Ben said finally, "for leaving, for what it did to my mother. But then I look around here, and I realize maybe he was just broken. The kind of broken that doesn't know where to belong." Leah nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." He looked at her then, really looked like he saw every reason she'd left and every reason she might stay. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Leah sat by the fire, turning the locket over in her hands again. The glass caught the light. Throwing a shimmer across the room, she thought about all the names that had lived in this house. Margaret, Thomas, Benjamin. Hers. Names carved into fences, letters, trees. Names carried like prayers through years of silence. She whispered softly, "What do we do with the roots that don't belong to us anymore?" From the doorway, Ben's voice answered, "You let them grow anyway." He walked in, sat down across from her. The firelight flickered across his face. "I didn't mean to dig all this up," she said. "You didn't," he said. "It was already here. You just started listening." She smiled faintly. "You and your tree metaphors." "They're true," he said, shrugging. "Things die if they're ignored. People too." They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackle of burning wood. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, steady, cleansing. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. "My grandmother wrote that love can exist in pieces. You think that's true?" He looked into the fire. "Yeah, some pieces last longer than others. Sometimes they pass down." She met his eyes. "You think that's what this is?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "I think we're both standing in the same orchard, trying to figure out what to do with what's still growing." Outside, the rain eased. The smell of wet earth drifted through the open window. Leah leaned back in her chair, feeling something shift inside. Not closure, not clarity, but the beginning of both. Somewhere deep in the orchard, a blossom opened under the night sky, unseen but not unfelt. The forecast had said light rain. By late afternoon, the wind was howling hard enough to rattle the windows. Leah stood on the porch, watching clouds roll over the valley like a dark tide. The orchard, her orchard now, bent under the weight of the coming storm, branches shivering, leaves turning their pale undersides to the sky. Ben's truck skidded up the drive, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. He jumped out before the engine stopped, water soaking his shirt instantly. "We've got to tie the younger trees down. If the wind shifts, they'll snap." "I'll help," she said, grabbing her raincoat. "You shouldn't. Don't start that," she cut him off. "They're mine too." For a second he looked like he wanted to argue, but then he just nodded. "Fine, let's move." They ran into the storm together. The rain hit sideways, cold and wild. The wind roared through the orchard, tearing loose blossoms that swirled around them like snow. Each gust sounded like the world breathing too fast. Ben tossed her a length of rope. Tie from the base, low and tight. She knelt by a sapling, hands shaking from the cold, rope slick in her fingers. Behind her, thunder cracked. Emily's face flashed in her mind, back at the house. She prayed the windows would hold. "Ben," she shouted over the wind, "how bad's it going to get?" He looked up from a tree he was bracing. Bad enough. A sudden snap cut through the roar. One of the larger branches had broken free, swinging wildly. Leah ducked. Instinctively, as it crashed down just feet from where she stood, splintering the mud. Ben was there in seconds, grabbing her arm. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she panted, rain running down her face. "Keep going." They worked until their hands went numb, tying, pulling, bracing the trees as best they could. The ground had turned to thick mud, sucking at their boots. Every breath felt borrowed, and then, just as quickly as it had begun, the worst of it passed. The wind began to die, retreating back toward the hills. Rain softened to a steady drizzle. The orchard looked battered, branches broken, leaves stripped, but most of it still stood. Leah fell to her knees, exhausted, chest heaving. "We did it," she whispered. Ben dropped beside her, mud-streaked, soaked, his breath misting in the cold air. Barely. For a long moment they just sat there, side by side, watching what they had managed to save. When the storm finally broke open above them, a strange kind of silence followed, the kind that comes only after chaos. Rainwater dripped from the branches in rhythm, steady and forgiving. Ben reached over and brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. "You're shaking, so are you," she said softly. He laughed under his breath. "Yeah, well, we make a good mess." Leah looked at him, really looked, the way his eyes caught the grey light, how tired he looked, and how alive. For a second, she saw not the man who'd stayed behind, but the boy his father had left, the one still trying to hold things together long after they'd fallen apart. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. They walked back to the house together, soaked and silent. Emily met them at the door, eyes wide. "Are you okay?" Leah smiled, wiping mud from her face. "We're fine," Ben grinned at Emily. "Your mum's tougher than she looks." Emily rolled her eyes. "Yeah, she gets that from Grandma." Leah froze, just for a moment, and then laughed. "Maybe she does." Later, when the lights flickered back on, Leah stood at the window, watching the orchard glisten under the moonlight. So much had been torn, but so much had held. Ben came up beside her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Storms always do this," he said quietly. "They take what's weak, leave what's strong." She took a sip, the warmth spreading through her fingers. "You think that's true for people too?" He looked at her, then back at the trees. "Yeah, but sometimes what's strong isn't what you expect." The night settled around them like a promise. Outside, the orchard dripped and breathed, wounded, but alive, and for the first time since coming back, Leah realized she felt the same. The morning after the storm was so quiet, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Fog lingered low between the rows of apple trees. The ground was soft underfoot, soaked through and dark. Leah walked slowly, her boots sinking into the mud with every step. The air smelled of rain, bark, and renewal. She stopped beside the first tree, the one with the metal tag number 1. A large branch had snapped off, lying twisted in the grass. She brushed her fingers along the broken wood, tracing the fresh wound. "I'll fix you," she whispered. Behind her, Ben's voice was low. "Some things heal if you let them." She turned to find him standing there, holding a bucket of nails and rope. His hair was still damp from the shower, his face lined with tiredness, and something quieter, tenderness, maybe. "Emily's still asleep?" he asked. "Out cold," Leah said, smiling faintly. She said the storm sounded like dragons fighting. Ben chuckled. She's not wrong. They spent the morning walking the orchard together, propping up saplings, clearing fallen branches. The rhythm was slow, methodical, almost meditative. The sound of hammers and rope creaking blended with birds returning to the trees. Every so often, Leah would stop to breathe, to really see what was still standing. Most of it was. The orchard, like her, was stubborn. At noon, they sat on the tailgate of Ben's truck, sharing coffee from a thermos. For a while, they didn't talk. There was no need to. Then Ben said, "I found something near the south fence. Thought you should see." He handed her a small tin box, dented and rusted shut. Was buried under one of the fallen posts. Leah frowned. "You think it's hers? Only one way to know." Back at the house, Leah cleaned the box carefully, scraping off dirt until the latch gave. Inside were a few folded papers, faded, water-stained, but still legible. One was a hand-drawn map of the orchard. The handwriting was her grandmother's, near the northern edge. Under a cluster of trees, marked with tiny circles, there was a single note written in pencil, the first seeds. "For whoever listens." Ben leaned over her shoulder. "What do you think it means?" Leah traced the map with her finger. "I don't know, but she wanted someone to find it." He smiled faintly. "Looks like you were meant to." That afternoon, Leah and Ben followed the map. The air was heavy with the scent of wet leaves. Emily came along, carrying a small shovel she insisted on using. They stopped beneath a patch of older trees, the trunks thick and gnarled, their branches knotted like hands. "This is the spot," Leah said. Emily knelt and started digging. The soil was soft and dark, and within minutes her shovel struck something hard. She looked up wide-eyed. "Mum," Leah helped clear the dirt, revealing a small wooden box, no bigger than a loaf of bread. She lifted it gently, brushing off the mud. Inside were several glass jars, each filled with seeds, tiny, carefully labeled, Honeycrisp, Golden Delicious, Baldwin, Macintosh, and one jar with no label at all. At the bottom of the box lay a folded note, "For the next hands that tend this soil. The orchard is not just ours. It belongs to whoever keeps it alive." Emily's throat tightened. She wasn't saving them for herself, she whispered. She was saving them for us. Ben ran a finger along the edge of the box. "Your grandmother thought ahead. She always did," Leah said softly, even when she didn't say it out loud. They carried the box back to the porch. Emily cradled the unmarked jar like something sacred. "Can we plant them?" she asked. Leah smiled. "We will, but not all at once. Some things need time." Ben looked at her, a quiet smile tugging at his mouth. "You sound like her." Leah turned to him. "Maybe I'm starting to understand her." The wind shifted then, warm and gentle, carrying the smell of rain and apple blossoms. For a moment, everything, the orchard, the house, the people who remained seemed to exhale at once. The ground, Leah thought, remembers. It always does. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Leah stood on the porch with Emily. The orchard glowed gold under the fading light. "Mum," Emily said, leaning against her, "you think Grandma can see us?" Leah hesitated, then smiled. "I think she's right here. In the dirt, in the trees. In you," Emily nodded thoughtfully. "Then she's still growing." Leah laughed softly. "Yeah, she is." By the first week of May, The air had turned soft again. The last of the storm debris was gone, the sky back to its gentle blue. For the first time in months, the orchard smelled not of rain or decay, but of sap and promise. Leah stood by the porch railing, rolling one of the tiny seed jars in her hands. It was the unmarked one, the one her grandmother had left without a name. Inside, the seeds rattled faintly, like whispers from another time. Ben joined her, wiping his hands on a rag. "You ready?" She looked up, smiled. "As I'll ever be." Emily burst through the door, holding the small shovel she'd claimed as her own. "I get to plant the first one, right?" Leah nodded. "You do the honors." They walked down to the open patch of earth just beyond the north fence, the same spot where Leah had first found the letters. The soil there was darker, richer, fed by the roots of everything that had come before. Ben knelt and started to dig a small trench. "Perfect spot," he said. "Plenty of sun, good drainage." Leah laughed softly. "You talk about trees the way some people talk about love." He shrugged, smiling. "Same rules apply. You water what you want to keep." Emily crouched, carefully placing the seeds into the earth. Her hair fell in her face as she worked, her hands moving with quiet care. Leah watched her daughter and felt something warm rise in her chest, pride, but also something older, deeper. It struck her that maybe her grandmother had done this exact same thing once, knelt under this same sky, planting hope she might never see bloom, when the last seed was covered. Emily patted the soil gently and whispered, "Grow strong." Ben straightened, brushing dirt from his jeans. "That's how it starts." Leah smiled, eyes glistening. "It's how it always starts." The rest of the week slipped into a rhythm. Mornings in the orchard, afternoons fixing the old barn. Evenings filled with the sound of frogs and the hum of summer coming. Leah noticed small changes, the color returning to the leaves, the birds nesting again in the highest branches, even the bees finding their way back. Nature had a way of forgiving what humans couldn't. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Ben stopped by with a wooden crate. "I thought these might belong here," he said. Inside were jars of honey, each labeled in neat handwriting. "Maggie's gold." Leah blinked. "You kept her recipe." He nodded. "I started making it again. Could use a partner, though." She smiled softly. "Careful. I might take that seriously." "I'm counting on it," he said, eyes lingering on hers a little too long. They stood in silence for a moment, the light catching in the glass jars between them. Leah could smell the sweetness, warm, golden, real. "You ever think," she asked quietly, "that maybe this is what she wanted? Not just for the orchard to live again, but for someone to stay?" Ben looked out toward the rows of trees. "Yeah, maybe that's the only kind of legacy that matters, the kind that keeps going." Leah nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "The kind that remembers." That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Leah stepped outside. The sky was full of stars, the kind of clear you only get in small towns after a storm has washed everything clean. The orchard glowed faintly under the moonlight, the new soil dark and glistening. She could almost see her grandmother walking there, moving between the rows like a shadow stitched to the earth. Ben came up behind her. "Can't sleep." She shook her head. "Didn't want to." He leaned on the railing beside her. "You ever think maybe we don't choose the places that heal us? Maybe they choose us?" Leah turned to him, her voice low. "You sound like the kind of man who believes in second chances." He smiled. I learned from a woman who gave one to an orchard. She laughed softly, but there was a catch in her throat. Ben. He looked at her then, really looked the same way her grandmother must have looked at the man in those old letters, but without regret, only recognition. You don't have to say anything, he murmured. Just stay a while. Leah didn't answer. She didn't need to. She stepped closer, the space between them filled with the hum of crickets, the faint scent of apple blossoms blooming again, and for the first time in years, she let herself belong, not to the past, not to the grief, but to the ground that had always been waiting for her. By late June, the orchard had turned green again. The trees were full, heavy with new leaves and the faint promise of fruit. Bees moved lazily between blossoms, and every breeze carried that sweet, earthy scent Leah had once forgotten. The storm felt like a lifetime ago now. The world had softened, so had she. Leah sat at the kitchen table one morning, a cup of coffee cooling beside her, a blank notebook open in front of her, the same table her grandmother had once written at, the same spot where she'd read the letters that changed everything. Emily's drawings were scattered around the surface, sketches of trees, birds, the old house. In the corner of one, she'd drawn 3 small figures under a blooming apple tree, a woman, a man, and a girl. Beneath it, in small, careful letters, she'd written, "Us." Leah smiled, her throat tightening. She picked up her pen and began to write, "Dear Em, I used to think you left me a house, but now I see you left me something alive. You left me soil that remembers, roots that forgive, and a man who understands how things grow again when they're broken. You left me a way back to myself. Thank you." L. She paused, looked out the window. Ben was outside, mending a fence post, his shirt damp with sweat, his movements steady and sure. He caught her watching and smiled a quiet, knowing thing before turning back to his work. Leah's heart stuttered. For so long, she had been afraid of belonging to anything again. But now, the idea didn't scare her. It felt like breathing. Later that afternoon, she found Emily sitting under one of the new saplings, sketchbook balanced on her knees. "What are you drawing today?" Leah asked, settling beside her. Emily grinned. "The baby tree. I named it Hope." Leah smiled. "That's a good name." Ben said, "If it grows strong, it'll make apples in 3 years. That sounds about right." Emily looked up, her eyes bright. "Then we'll still be here, right?" Leah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, sweetheart. We will." That night, Leah wrote again. Not to her grandmother this time. "Dear Ben, you once said that storms take what's weak and leave what's strong. Maybe we were both wrong. Maybe storms just show us what was worth holding on to. The orchard stands because of you, because of your patience, because you never stopped listening. I think I'd like to stay, if you'll have me." L. She folded the note and slipped it into the locket. Next to the old photograph, the one of Benjamin Hale, it felt right, somehow, to keep all those generations of letters together, the ones that were sent, the ones that weren't, and the one that finally could be. The next morning, Ben found her by the fence, checking the soil around the new seedlings. "You've been up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He leaned on the post beside her. "You planning on pruning again without supervision?" She smiled. "I'm getting good at it." "I know," he said, softly. "You're getting good at a lot of things." She turned toward him. "Like staying put?" He nodded. "Like that?" For a while, they just stood there, side by side, the orchard humming quietly around them. It was the sound of something that had stopped waiting because it didn't need to anymore. Leah exhaled, long and slow. The earth smelled alive. Her hands were dirty. Her heart was full, and for the first time since coming home, she wasn't thinking about what she'd lost, only about what was still growing. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch, the setting sun painting everything in shades of gold. Emily handed Ben one of her drawings, the same one from before, of the three of them beneath the tree. "I made this for you," she said shyly, "'cause you're part of it now." Ben's throat worked. "Thank you, kiddo. I'll put it right on my fridge." Leah smiled quietly, her hand finding his. "Told you the orchard keeps growing." He looked at her, eyes warm. "Yeah, it does." By August, the orchard was alive again. The trees hummed with bees, apples blushed under the summer sun, and laughter carried down the hill like music. Leah stood near the porch, apron dusted with flour, her hair tucked up and cheeks flushed from the heat of the oven. Inside, Emily and Ben were setting tables with jars of apple honey and hand-painted signs that read, "The Orchard Festival, Welcome Home." It had been Emily's idea. "You said Grandma's orchard used to have people in it," she'd said weeks earlier. "So let's bring them back." And they did. The whole town showed up, faces Leah hadn't seen in 20 years. Neighbors, old classmates, even Mrs. Patterson from the diner, holding a basket of biscuits like a peace offering to time. The air was thick with the scent of baked pies, cider and sun-warmed fruit. Children chased each other through the rows, ribbons tied around their wrists, fluttering like petals. A local band played on the back of Ben's truck, the music twining through the branches overhead. Leah watched from the steps, the hum of voices mixing with the rustle of leaves. It felt like the orchard was breathing again, not just with life, but with memory. Ben came up behind her, carrying 2 glasses of cider. "You did this," he said, handing one to her. She smiled. "We did this." He looked around, eyes soft. "Your grandmother would have loved it." Leah nodded. "She's here, somewhere between the roots and the sky." Later, as the sun sank low, Emily took the small wooden box of seeds they hadn't planted and set it on the old table under the first tree. She'd tied a tag to it that read, "For whoever listens next." Leah felt her throat tighten. "You remembered," Emily grinned. "You said the orchard belongs to whoever keeps it alive." Ben ruffled her hair. "Sounds like she's been paying attention." Emily giggled and ran off toward her friends, her laughter fading into the golden light dot as dusk deepened. The crowd thinned, leaving lanterns swaying gently between the trees. Fireflies blinked in the dark like tiny stars trying to find their place. Leah and Ben walked through the orchard in silence. The ground was still warm under their feet, the smell of apples rich in the air. She stopped by the north fence, the place where it had all begun, the first letters, the first tree, the first truth. Now, instead of loss, she felt only peace. Ben stood beside her, quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, I think he'd be proud, my father, of what this place became." Leah looked at him, her voice soft. "I think they both would. Maybe that's what they wanted all along, for someone to stay and finish the story." He smiled faintly. "Looks like you did." She shook her head. "No, we did." They lingered as the last lanterns flickered out. The orchard glowed under the rising moon, rows of trees whispering in the dark, branches heavy with life. Leah turned to him. You ever think about how far this came? From a broken fence and a forgotten house. Ben nodded slowly. From a woman who came back when she didn't have to. She smiled. From a man who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. He reached out, taking her hand. Maybe that's how everything grows. Not from what's planted, but from who stays to tend it. The night was quiet, except for the sound of crickets and wind through leaves. Leah looked out across the orchard, her grandmother's legacy, her own second chance, and felt something inside her settle for good. For so long, she had been writing letters to the past. Now, she finally understood. Some letters don't need stamps. They find their way through the living, through laughter, through hands in the soil, through love that refuses to leave. Days later, Leah placed one final envelope in the old chest in the attic, beside her grandmother's letters. On it, she'd written simply, "To whoever finds this next." The orchard listens. So should you. She closed the lid gently. Outside, the wind carried the scent of ripening apples through the open window. Somewhere beyond the hills, a new season was coming. And this time, Leah was ready. Autumn came softly to the valley. The air turned crisp. Mornings carried a thin fog that curled through the trees like breath. The apples hung heavy and red now, bending the branches with their weight. For the first time since Leah came back, the orchard looked whole. She stood in the middle row, a basket at her feet, sunlight filtering through the leaves. Her hands moved automatically, twist, lift, drop, the rhythm of harvest. The sound of apples landing against wicker was the most peaceful sound she knew. Ben was farther down the line, shirt sleeves rolled, humming under his breath as he worked. Emily ran between them, collecting the ones that fell, her laughter ringing like wind chimes through the orchard. Every few minutes she'd call, "I found the biggest one," and Leah would smile and say, "Save it for the pie." By noon, the baskets were full. They spread a blanket under the first tree, the one that had started it all, and ate lunch there, sandwiches, cider, apple slices dipped in honey. Emily sprawled on the grass, eyes half closed. "Do you think Grandma would have liked this?" Leah looked out over the rows of trees, the sunlight flashing between them like memory. "I think she'd say, 'We finally listened.'" Ben chuckled. "She'd probably still tell me I'm pruning wrong." Leah laughed, shaking her head. "You'd let her," he grinned. "I'd argue first." They fell into an easy silence, then, broken only by the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves overhead. The orchard was alive in every sense, not just a place, but a heartbeat that all three of them shared now. That evening, after Emily had gone inside, Leah and Ben stayed on the porch. The sky was the color of copper, the air carrying the smell of cider and wood smoke. "She's happy here," Leah said softly. "I didn't think she would be." Ben leaned back against the railing. "Kids adjust faster than we give them credit for. They just need something real to hold on to, and you." She asked, "You think you'll ever leave?" He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Not if I can help it." Leah smiled, eyes glinting in the last light. "Then I guess neither will I." As the days shortened, the harvest came to an end. The trees, lighter now, shimmered in shades of gold and amber. Leah kept one basket aside, filled with the best apples. She planned to make cider the way her grandmother used to, the night before the first frost. She stood out by the north fence, holding one of the apples in her hand. The moon was bright enough to turn the orchard silver. She thought about the first time she'd stood here. lost and angry, trying to figure out what this place wanted from her. Now she knew it had never wanted anything. It had only waited. She took a bite of the apple. The taste was sharp, sweet, real. She closed her eyes, smiling. Winter would come soon. She could already feel it in the wind, but she didn't dread it anymore. The orchard would sleep, as it always had, and she would stay to watch over it. Ben's footsteps crunched behind her. "You okay?" She nodded, turning toward him. "Just thinking." "About what?" "How some seasons don't end," she said. "They just change." He smiled. "Guess that's life. Guess so." He reached for her hand, and she let him. The air was cold, but their hands were warm. In the distance, the trees swayed lightly, whispering in the wind. Weeks later, the first snow dusted the orchard. Leah stood at the window, watching flakes settle on bare branches, and realized she wasn't thinking about leaving anymore. The house no longer felt borrowed, it felt kept. Behind her, Emily and Ben were in the kitchen, laughing over a batch of burnt cookies. The smell of sugar and smoke filled the air. Leah turned, heart full. "Save me one," she called. "Only if you help us make more," Ben replied. Leah walked toward them, smiling. "Deal." Outside, the orchard slept under a thin blanket of white, waiting for another spring. Inside the house by the orchard was full again of warmth, of laughter, of life, and somewhere between the walls and the roots, between what was lost and what remained, the story of all of them kept growing, not loud, not perfect, just steady, like a season that finally decided to stay.